The stars are right, and that means it's time for another episode of The Whisper in Darkness. I'm your host, the Man from Lang. Thank you very much for joining me today. On this episode, we are continuing with our review of the Investigators in the Edge of the Earth Investigator expansion. This time around, we're going to take a look at the Seeker/Mystic Investigator in the box, Norman Withers. There are spoilers throughout if you care about that sort of thing. If you enjoy what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Before we get started, I'd like to thank the patrons of this channel for their tremendous support. The Arkham Horror LCG community is amazing, and these people have gone above and beyond to bring you content like these Investigator reviews. If you'd like to support the channel's goals and see your name on this list, head over to patreon.com, sign up for a tier of your choice, and claim your rewards. That would be awesome. Special thanks to Coleman Rochitty for the amazing art that graces the channel, Nicole Fiscus for the new Whisper in Darkness logo that graces the podcast, and Nate Lost in Time and Space for the intro as well as the overlays. Thank you very much. I couldn't do it without you. Without further ado, let's get started. We are back to talk about more Investigators from the Edge of the Earth Investigator expansion. This time around, we're going to take a look at the Seeker Investigator, Norman Withers, the Astronomer. Norman has 4 willpower, 5 intellect, 2 combat, and 1 agility. The Miskatonic trait, his special ability is play with the top card of your deck revealed. Once per round, you may play the top card of your deck as if it were in your hand at -1 resource cost. He has a forced effect after a weakness is revealed while on top of your deck. Draw it. His Elder Sign ability is +X. You may swap the top card of your deck with a card in your hand. X is the resource cost of the top card of your deck. He has 6 health and 8 sanity. Now, Norman is in an interesting position in terms of Investigators because of all of the Investigators in the Edge of the Earth box, Norman has actually been out for quite some time. His promo copy was released in the Ire of the Void novella, which was released, man, at this point it was about 3 years ago. So Norman has been available for quite some time. I think he's actually of all the promo Investigators, he is the one who went the longest between being spoiled and actually appearing in print. Of course, Norman, when he was released with his replacement signature cards, Split the Angle and Vengeful Hound. So players have been building Norman decks with those 2 cards for years at this point. With the release of Edge of the Earth, Norman now has his real signature cards, the Livre de Bon and the Harbinger, which change up his deck building quite a bit from the old deck. The other thing to note about Norman is that he was the first Investigator to have the deck building restrictions that are now on all of the Investigators in the Edge of the Earth expansion. He starts off as a Seeker, being an astronomer who works in a university, but he does not remain a Seeker. Once he gains some experience points, he begins to delve deeper into the mysteries of the mythos and becomes a full-blown mystic by the end of the game. Now, Norman's stat line is very, very good in terms of sort of the key things you want to be doing in this game, those being surviving willpower treacheries and investigating locations. He's not going to have too much trouble passing willpower skill tests with 4 willpower, and there are plenty of cards available in the Mystic card pool that can bump that to a 5 or a 6 relatively easily. Of course, 5 intellect is amazing. I'll say it once, I'll say it again, that playing a 5 intellect Investigator is almost like night and day in this game. The ability to pick up clues at all but the highest shroud locations can make this game very, very easy. Of course, Norman is an old man who is not pumping iron in the Miskatonic gym. He's busy staring through his telescope, so he only has 2 combat and 1 agility, which means enemy management is going to be something of an issue. You're really going to have to lean on that willpower in order to deal with enemies, or cards like Mind Over Matter to boost those skills up a little bit higher in order to fight or evade. And of course, depending on the campaign, Norman could be in quite a bit of trouble, especially in something like the Forgotten Age that really tests agility. Poor Norman is going to be probably end up poisoned at some point, so you may want to bring along some provisions to help him out. What do you guys think about Norman's stat line?
Yeah, I could imagine it would also be very good in Circle Undone, where that also asks you to do quite a few willpower skill tests, in addition to the haunted effect being failing investigate checks. So having 5 intellect to make sure you pass those tests is nice. He might struggle in Innsmouth a bit, because Innsmouth is another campaign that asks you to do quite a bit of evading, both in the enemies and some of the more annoying treachery cards, I believe, are evasion skill tests. So he might struggle a bit in that, but I really like that ability to be able to play cards from the top of your deck at -1 resource. That's essentially draw a card and gain a resource.
Yeah, if you set it up every turn. I mean, think like Joe Diamond. He gets kind of a similar ability where he gets like a side card that he can, play from his hunch deck at a lower cost every round. Yeah, and Norman kind of gets to do the same thing. The thing that separates Norman from Joe is that Norman lets you manipulate your deck to kind of set up what's on top to maximize its usefulness. I mean, I'm immediately thinking Ward of Protection in Norman to deal with those treacheries. Like, if you have a Ward of Protection sitting on top of your deck, it's like, I pay 0, I cancel that agility treachery, and then I get another card. It's like I've kind of it's like you've drawn it. So max value right there, right?
Yeah, and it makes card draw interesting in this deck too, because you can, sort of cycle through cards and dig for, extra things. It kind of gives you like a +1 in all of your search effects in that way.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And also it's worth noting that, after a weakness is revealed while on top of your deck, draw it. Okay, so even though you have to take the weakness earlier than you thought you would, it's gone. It's not like sucking up your, like, an action draw or your upkeep draw, right? Because the weakness just goes right into your hand. And I guess what I'm saying is, it's like, even the weakness part, it's like a free draw. It doesn't even take up your free play for the turn. Your weakness just goes away. Yeah, you have to deal with it, and you might not have been ready for it, but
yeah, I think you make a good point there, nice. Matastrophic. When you're drawing during the upkeep phase, it always feels pretty bad when you draw a weakness during the upkeep phase, because not only have you now drawn a weakness that you have to deal with, but you've basically lost that draw that was going to help you further down maybe even the next round. You needed a card either to commit to a skill test, or you were looking for a particular asset to play, and the weakness you've drawn that weakness in place of that card, and so it's sort of a double setback. So the fact that Norman just gets the weakness in his hand automatically is nice. The problem I find with Norman is that drawing a weakness during the upkeep phase is generally better than during your turn, and often with Norman you can end up pulling that weakness during your turn and you're not ready for it. This is particularly bad with those weaknesses that cause you to lose health and sanity unless you do X during your turn. So if you, say, end up drawing into that weakness, suddenly you're getting pinged for a damage or a horror that you weren't expecting, or you draw an enemy weakness that suddenly it's like, oh, I'm fine, and then suddenly you draw this enemy weakness, and now you're being attacked during the enemy phase and taking damage and horror that you weren't expecting. And horror, not so much of an issue for Norman. He has 8 sanity, so that's not a big deal, but 6 health, that's going to chip away at that pretty rapidly if you're getting attacked, and potentially, unless you're able to deal with that enemy quickly, you can run into trouble. Now, Norman's signature cards, his replacement signature cards, did include an enemy weakness. Now, it wasn't the Vengeful Hound wasn't the most difficult enemy to deal with. Typically one Shriveling Charge was more than enough to take care of it. But it could, if you do end up drawing an enemy as your basic weakness, then that's something you need to keep in mind, because you're probably not going to draw it during the upkeep phase, so you're going to have to deal with it at some point. But Norman's special ability is very, very good. Seekers tend to be very good at generating extra resources as it is, and so the ability to play a card off the top of your deck for a little bit cheaper makes, there are some of those some seeker cards that are just a little too pricey for other investigators to play, and so Norman can play those cards a little bit cheaper, which is nice. When I've played Norman, I think initially in my decks I was playing emergency cash and cards like that to generate extra resources, and then ended up just pulling them because between the resource generation I was getting from cards like Dr. Mylan Christopher and then the -1 resource cost on events and assets, I was fine for resources, so it wasn't that big a deal. We have seen plenty of cards sort of released over the years that talk about the top card of your deck, and obviously Norman is the ideal investigator to be. If you want to play those types of cards, then they are really geared towards Norman, because he always knows what the top card of his deck is, and that, of course, besides being able to play that card as a sort of an extra card in your hand, it does allow you to plan a little bit ahead and say, okay, I have X on top of my deck. I want to move, fight, or investigate. How does this help me? And then, of course, Norman has received several cards, both his new signature cards as well as cards in the Edge of the Earth, that allow him to manipulate the card on top of his deck. So the one thing to note is about when Norman was initially released and he had to work with Split the Angle and Vengeful Hound, is that Norman decks tended to avoid playing a lot of skills, because skills basically blanked his ability. If a skill was on top of your deck, there was nothing you could really do about it besides playing Split the Angle, and generally Split the Angle was better to commit than play. The abilities on it weren't that good, so if you drew too many if you put too many skills in your Norman deck, they could end up on top of your deck, and then you were like, well, now my ability has been turned off, and you have to do some sort of trick to fix the problem. Norman's new signature cards alleviate that problem to a greater extent, and so you're seeing Norman decks now that are actually including a full complement of skills and having cards that can manipulate them. So that's one of the biggest changes between sort of the Norman of old and the Norman of new, is the deck composition has shifted, where I think in my old Norman decks I play like the bare minimum of skills. It's like, okay, I need deduction and maybe unexpected courage to pass a combat skill test or an agility skill test. That was about it. But now, if you look at some of the Norman decks that are available, they're playing 10, 11 skills because they have the cards to manipulate them. Now, Norman's Elder Sign effect is one of the wonkier Elder Sign effects in the game. It's +X, which is equal to the top card of your deck. Now, again, here is where the skills are not your friend, because skills don't have a cost, so they're basically zeros. But it does give you the option to swap the top card of your deck with a card in your hand. I've played a lot of games with Norman, and I might have swapped once, maybe twice. It's just not something that happens all that often.
Yeah, at least it does something. Where a lot of the Elder Signs that are just +X, that's it. Like, it might as well be a +0, practically. But at least this one, even if the top card of your deck is a skill, at least it does something, regardless of whether you succeed or fail.
Yeah, so that's how I feel about it. It's like Elder Signs really vary anyway. We were actually talking about that recently in an episode of the show, but like, at least like Matt said, it does something, and it's something you want to do and don't really want to invest cards in.
Yeah.
So like, having it is nice.
Yeah, plus if you're drawing that Elder Sign during your turn, I think it can help the whole Norman stacking the top card of his deck strategy. It's just a little thing that may not come up very often, but
yeah, I mean, it's better than Finn's Elder Sign, right?
Yeah.
Finn's Elder Sign gets you clues. Come on, man. What are you talking about? That's one of the better Elder Signs.
Now, Finn's is like +1 for each exhausted enemy, man.
Yeah, but you get a clue.
Do you really?
Yeah, look at it.
2 hours later.
But
Oh, yeah,
anyway,
it's
we're talking about
wait,
Norman.
Wait, we're talking about Norman here.
So yeah, Norman's front side is very, very good. 4 willpower is going to help you in many a campaign. There's very rarely that you're not going to run into willpower treacheries. Of course, Norman is part mystic, especially as you gain some experience, and that just helps you cast those spells. 5 intellect, amazing, can't go wrong there. Enemy management, back, if this was the core set days, 2 combat and 1 agility would be I'd be pretty worried about playing Norman solo, but Seekers have received so many cards to mitigate their low combat and agility over the years that's almost not even an issue anymore. As long as you're somewhat competent about building your deck, you can mitigate those downsides. The biggest issue you're going to run into is just in some campaigns where there are going to be treacheries that are going to really hard lock you, like just even from the core set. Like a locked door for Norman is a nightmare, unless you've got a way to bypass it. All the intellect in the world isn't going to help you in that case. But and of course you get the resource advantage as well from his special ability. So very very good there.
The only, I think, trouble you could run into with that front side is that, okay, so Norman, your higher level cards, you want them to be mystic cards. Well, they have to be mystic cards. Thing is, a lot of the mystic investigation cards use your willpower. You want to be using your 5 intellect to do investigation. So, Mr. Lang, in the past, what have you done? Have you used intellect with Norman? Have you focused on that, or have you investigated with willpower? What worked for you?
Well, we'll get into that here with Norman's deck building restrictions, because that does raise an interesting question. I think back in the day, you would have had to have gone to willpower because you needed to use Rite of Seeking if you wanted to gather multiple clues. I think with the new series of Mystic/Seeker assets, particularly like Divination, that gives you the choice, that issue has been largely alleviated. So you play Divination instead, you're getting the extra clues you need, and then you have the choice of using Intellect or Willpower, unlike, say, Rite of Seeking or some of the others that are available out there that forced you into using Willpower. So speaking of Norman's deck building options, deck size 30, of course. He has Seeker cards level 0, Mystic cards level 1 to 5, neutral cards level 0 to 5, and up to 5 other Mystic cards level 0. He has deck building requirements, which do not count towards his deck size, are the Livre de Bonne and the Harbinger, and of course 1 basic weakness. Now, Norman's kind of an interesting Seeker for one other reason, and that is that Seekers tend to be, in terms of cluevers, they go to a location and just slurp up all the clues very quickly. Norman can't really do that all that well. He has received some cards that can help with that. I mean, obviously in the core set you've got Deduction, which can give him an extra clue. Fingerprint Kit was released during the Circle Undone cycle that can get him extra clues as well. But being a Seeker who can't take level 1 to 5 Seeker cards, he's basically locked out of all of the clue tech like Archaic Glyphs. He can't take any of those sort of strange solution, Archaic Glyphs, Ancient Stones. Any of that stuff is off limits for him. Which means if you're going to play Norman as your primary cluever, then you've got to look over at the Mystic card pool and start looking at cards like Rite of Seeking. The higher level versions, I think it's 2 and 5, is that correct? You've got
2 and 4.
2 and 4, you've got Divination, level 1 and 4. And then, of course, you've got a few of the others. Obviously, Divination here being better for him because he can leverage that intellect. So if you're playing Norman as the primary cluever, you need to sort of think a little bit about how you're going to be gathering all those extra clues, because compared to a traditional Seeker, Norman is going to be a little bit slower because he simply doesn't have access to, say, Deduction 2, which if you're playing a Seeker in multiplayer, Deduction 2 is pretty much a staple, and Norman doesn't get that. So what do you guys think?
What he does get, he gets Magnifying Glass. He gets Dr. Milan Christopher if he wants to generate resources. He gets Deduction. He gets Working a Hunch. He gets, and here's a thought, because he has 5 intellect, I think Cryptographic Cipher can work pretty well for him. Because the Cryptographic Cipher, you can free action investigate but the location is +1 Shroud. I think his intellect is high enough that he can get extra clues that way. So I think in level 0 Seeker, I think he can make it work.
Yeah, I think it's improved a lot, with the addition of cards like Cryptographic Cipher and Fingerprint Kit in particular. Back when Norman was initially released, those cards weren't available, so it was kind of hard to sort of cobble together enough clues with what he had. But, over the years, we've seen these cards come out that let him grab clues as a free action, or in the case of Fingerprint Kit, gather multiple clues on an investigation until he can lean into that Mystic side. Now, when I sit down to build a Norman deck, I generally start with the 5 Mystic cards, because man, oh man, there is a lot of competition for those 5 Mystic slots. Now, traditionally, Mystics just, if you sit down to build a Mystic deck, you're usually reaching for things like Arcane Research. There's also now Down the Rabbit Hole, but that's not necessarily the easiest choice to make with somebody like Norman, because Arcane Research counts against those Mystic slots. So you have to decide, do I want the extra XP to upgrade my spells, which Norman doesn't start with a whole lot of spells to begin with, so that may not be, there used to be a lot of debate about whether Norman plays Shriveling or not, and that was the obvious one that you wanted to upgrade. But with something like Arcane Research, you're just not generally going to have enough Mystic spells to be upgrading out of. Of course, you've got to decide on allies. Norman likes cards like Research Librarian primarily for the new Astronomical Atlas. But of course, you've got Dr. Milan Christopher. But then on the Mystic side, you've got Arcane Initiate, which can help him find the spells he needs faster, which is very tempting. You've got cards like David Renfield.
Yeah.
And if you want to play, you can sort of play in encounter deck control style build out of Norman. So if you want to play, what's her name?
Alyssa Graham.
Alyssa Graham is another option. And Alyssa does bump his intellect even higher up to 6. So there are some pretty good choices in the Mystic card pool, but man, 5 slots doesn't go very far, especially when you've got all those staples like Ward of Protection sitting there. Now, when I was building Norman, I would generally leave Ward of Protection out to begin with and just sort of rely on his 4 willpower to carry the day until I could upgrade some cards, remove a couple of those level 0 Mystic cards, and then put the Ward of Protections back in if I needed them. If you're playing multiplayer, that's not such a big issue because you can simply upgrade to Ward 2, which is what you want to have anyway, so you're not you don't have to sort of spend XP on level 0 cards. There are so many good Mystic cards that work well with Norman. Again, we've got something like St. Hubert's Key, right, which gives you +1 willpower and +1 intellect, which just feeds right into what Norman is doing. But with only 5 slots, you're basically getting 1, 2, maybe 3 Mystic cards if you're doubling up. And there are just so many choices.
Yeah, I was having the debate of which resource generation ally do you play? Do you play Milan Christopher or do you play David Renfield? Because they do serve a very similar purpose. But you could make arguments for both, I think, because Renfield has the extra health soak, which is actually really nice. And
and it's
the
soak that
willpower
you're
boost.
okay with zooing.
Mhm.
It's soak that you're okay with using because you want him to go away.
Yeah,
Yeah.
versus Mylan Christopher, who's much more fragile but doesn't take up those crucial slots.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a really tough decision to make. And then another card I was thinking about is Deny Existence, which is a great card in Mystic decks, but
Oh.
is really taxing in Norman,
Yeah.
at least at level 0. And the level 5 version feels more of a luxury a lot of the time than necessary.
No, you got me thinking. Right, deny existence because that can help. That can really help him compensate for his lack of agility and his lack of combat, especially agility, because there's quite a few agility treacheries that deal damage. He only has 6 health. Deny existence. Boom. He could even though he won't get the discount, he could even play it off the top of his deck. And
Yeah, and Deny
Yeah.
Existence just lets you do lines of play you wouldn't otherwise be able to, because you can kind of just face tank something and then just Deny
Yeah.
Existence it away, so
yeah, exactly.
yeah, that's
Okay.
much more difficult in Norman.
Uh-huh.
So yeah,
Yeah.
those slots are difficult because you kind of want everything, but you can't.
It's true. Yeah, there's a lot of options. I'm looking through the cards that he can take right now, and there's a lot of options. I think a way you could do it is you can do you have 2 of the Mystic slots can go to a spell that deals with enemies, whether it's like Missive Relay or Shriveling, and then you have 2 Deny Existences, and then a something, whatever you want. Then you're good. Yeah, I guess. Wow, it is tough. 5 is very small.
Yeah. So I'm almost wondering if you sort of plan your seeker cards to be pseudo mystic cards in a way.
Yeah, that
Or
do
at least
similar
like
things to
cards that
people.
you plan on upgrading out of, yeah.
Mhm.
And then have those 5 slots be something wholly unique that you can't do otherwise, which is sort
Okay.
of counterintuitive, but
So, Nate, you sound like a guy who's gonna investigate using intellect.
I mean, I don't see why you wouldn't.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, I
So,
feel like Fingerprint Kid is probably just enough. Like,
yeah,
you're at a 6 at that point.
yeah, throw in some magnifying glasses that you can play fast from the top of your deck for 0, and you're good to go on
Yeah.
investigation. Yeah, at 0 XP. So you're talking about use your mystic slots for things that are not investigation. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and then you upgrade. You can do mystic upgrades that do
Yeah, and
investigation, but that's
I
later.
don't think that that's like what most people don't do. It seems like, if
Mhm.
you're talking about upgrading into shriveling and stuff like that, that's what you're doing with those slots, right?
Mhm.
So,
I think one option that you might be able to get away with Norman, because he does get that, you are looking at the top card of your deck and you're going to be able to draw through your deck a little bit faster, is simply going with singletons in the Mystic slot and saying, okay, if I was playing a regular Mystic, I'd be playing 2 copies of Deny Existence or Promise of Power or Word of Protection or stuff like that. But due to Norman's deck building restrictions and his ability to draw through his deck a little bit quicker, okay, maybe I can get away with 1 copy. And so you give yourself a little bit more. You get to play more of those cards, but you're only playing 1 copy. So you're going down to 1 Deny, 1 Promise. If you're playing, say, St. Hubert's Key, 1 St. Hubert's Key, and just relying on draw and tutors and stuff like that to carry the day. So those deck slots aren't quite as tight as they are when you start building.
That actually makes sense. That actually makes sense because I think Norman can very much afford preposterous sketches, which can be kind of annoying to afford as a seeker. But Norman, I think, can do it because it only costs him 1 if he plays it off the top of his deck.
yeah. No Stone Unturned is another nice card for
That's
Norman
another
too.
one.
Because
Yeah,
it
that's
kind of
true.
essentially allows you to look at 7 cards, because you look at the top 6 and then you shuffle your deck and then you see
and
them.
you get another one.
You get
That's right.
another card, so
Okay.
that's kind of a nice synergy. And if you don't like the top card of your deck, then you can just get rid of it. So that's a nice feature. Yeah, and that makes a good case for maybe you play some Mystic Tome. Like, I was thinking, what's the name of that one that lets you draw 3 and discard 1?
Oh
That might be
yeah.
useful.
Right. I Scroll of Prophecy.
Yes, yeah. You could play like one of those because you're already playing 2 copies of your research librarian, so maybe you happen to draw one of them in your opening hand, and now at least the research librarian has something to go get you.
Yeah, it's true.
Norman does have Eureka as well, and while skills would have been sort of verboten in the old Norman builds, you can play more skills, so you can, between things like Eureka, and then of course you've got Written in the Stars that allows you to manipulate your deck, Foresight that allows you to sort of manipulate your deck. You've got all of these options to sort of, I need X card, okay, even though I'm only playing 1 copy, I'm going to have a better chance of grabbing it than, say, an Investigator who's playing a deck that doesn't have all that manipulation. I should mention there are a couple things to note about Norman. One, when do you flip the top card of your deck? You don't do that until the first turn of the game. There was some debate back in the day. When do you flip that card? You flip it right when your turn starts. So you draw your hand as normal and do all that stuff. You don't like sit down, flip the top card of your deck. Oh, I drew my weakness. Oh crap. Now what happens?
Shuffle.
Yeah, you just draw the top card you draw your 5 cards, then you flip the card, then you deal with it. So Norman can end up drawing his weakness on turn 1. If that's an enemy, that could hurt quite a bit. Especially if you're playing solo and you're not set up to deal with an enemy, suddenly you've got this enemy to deal with. That's pretty bad. The other thing worth noting is that if you are forced to discard cards from the top of your deck, cards are discarded all at once, not one at a time. So you're not discarding a card, flipping the top card of your deck, discarding a card. So you would have to like run through every single weakness you draw. You simply, if you say discard 5, you just discard the top 5, then flip the top card of your deck and deal with it that way. I remember back in the day I played a Norman game where I wasn't playing that way. I was doing it one at a time, and I think I hit every single weakness in my deck, and it was incredibly painful to do it that way. So
yeah. Well, that's important that you bring that up, because that is how it works in most other card games, is that you do it one at a time. So that is really important that you bring that up.
Oh man, I'm suddenly imagining that when you have Overzealous as your weakness.
I did have Overzealous as my weakness. Yeah.
Or spoilers for Edge of the Earth, you're playing Edge of the Earth and you have like 4 or 5 Tekalilis in your deck.
Ouch.
Oh.
But on the other hand, though, that's where Norman's special ability to just draw through them without spending any actions is good, because you just blow through the Tekalilis.
And you have Danforth, and then you draw more cards, and
yeah, and then there are more Tekalilis, you blow through them, and fine, yeah.
One of the things I do like about Norman's deck building options is that you can build quite a few different decks in using his ability. I mean, you can, if you want to play him as a classic Kluver, you can do that. You can cobble together enough clue discovery to make that work. As I mentioned, there is sort of an encounter deck manipulation build that you can play out of Norman using cards like his replacement card, Split the Angle, and Alyssa Graham. That combo works particularly well because you can peek at the top card with Alyssa Graham and then not add the Doom, and then you Split the Angle to get rid of the card. And of course, we've received many cards since Norman was released that allow you to sort of boost up that strategy, Parallel Fates being one from Edge of the Earth that you may want to consider. I've even seen players build Mind's Eye decks using Norman, Mind's Eye being from Weaver of the Cosmos, that takes up both arcane slots, and that gives you the option of using your willpower for combat and agility skill tests. And obviously that's something that Norman is quite happy to do, and I had a chance to test one of those decks, and it actually worked surprisingly well. And because Seekers have so many ways of adding extra secrets, keeping Mind's Eye on the table was relatively relatively easy. So I think there are lots of interesting builds that you can make out of Norman that make him a little bit more flexible than some of the others, where it's just like, okay, I'm just going to discover as many clues as quickly as possible.
Yeah, Norman is really fascinating, I think, for more veteran players, but I feel like he could be pretty intimidating for a newer player just trying to get their grips with the game, because there's a lot going on with Norman. And
Yeah.
I think they did a good job of giving him enough in the Edge of the Earth box that you could, if you really wanted to, build a pretty competent deck with him. Having 5 intellect helps too. So
a lot
you
of
have enough tools with just what's in the box, but then as you expand your collection, it becomes really vast, and he has a lot of flexibility to him, which is, I think, one of his key strengths.
Yeah, I see what you mean, Nate. Like, for a newer player, just the fact that he can't deal with a locked door, without some planning, is not exactly someone you want to hand. You don't want to hand that deck to someone on their first day.
Yeah, or even just being bogged down with an enemy that they
Yeah.
didn't properly plan to deal with.
Exactly. Yeah, you got to be ready.
It's usually the enemies that locked door is a huge pain in the butt. But I mean, if you've opted to spend one of your level 0 slots on Sixth Sense, there is a way to get around it by investigating at another location and sneaking in the back door. Enemies, if you are playing with his replacement signatures, can be an issue, but Mind Over Matter really helps. You've got, of course, I've got a plan now if you want to go that way, if you can get enough clues to sort of boost that up. There was another card that was released in, was it Occult? What's the card from Harvey Walters' deck?
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
Occult Invocation. Yeah.
Occult Invocation that lets you take care of an enemy. And even just, Promise of Power. It's like 4 wild skill icons is going to, if you need to kill a rat, you're sitting at 6. So that's pretty good. If you need to evade an enemy, you're sitting at a 5. So you can't really go wrong there. That brings us to Norman's signature cards, that being the Livre de Bon. It is a 2-cost asset with 2 willpower skill icons and a wild skill icon, item, relic, and tome traits. Norman Withers deck only. As a free triggered ability, you can exhaust the Livre de Bon to swap the top card of your deck with a card in your hand. And as a free triggered ability, exhaust Livre de Bon, commit the top card of your deck to an eligible skill test performed by an investigator at your location. And it takes up a hand slot. As you were saying, Nate, this pretty much does everything that Norman wants to do. You can play more skills in your deck. You have a very easy way of manipulating that top card of your deck, whether you, say, want to swap so you can play that, say, St. Hubert's Key for a little bit cheaper. You may not have the resources. I swap. Now it's a little bit cheaper. Or if you end up with a deduction on the top of your deck and you need to happen to investigate, voila, you can commit it from the top of your deck, thus freeing up that slot. So then maybe you play the next card for cheap.
Yes.
Also, one thing to note is that this combos really well with any effect that lets you shuffle your deck. Because if you have a card you don't want, you put it on top in exchange for a card that might be better. Then you shuffle your deck with something, and then you got a new card that you could play, for cheaper. So I think then there's some real synergy going on there.
That's the Brainstorm synergy. Brainstorm plus Fetchland.
I was not going to be the one to say Brainstorm plus Fetchland, but
that's the interaction. Let's be.
I left it to you, Nate. I left it to you.
I mean, that is a very powerful interaction for a reason. You're going +1 in card advantage, which is very good.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, this is just a great signature card for him. Not only does he have easy access to it with Research Librarian, but it does exactly what he needs it to do, which is manipulate the top of his deck. And if you, for whatever reason, don't see it until late in the game, it's got 3 willpower icons. That's so good.
That's true. That is a lot.
The one
true.
thing I will say against it though is that it does take up the hand slot, so
Right.
it does limit what you can do with your seeker cards, because a lot of the seeker cards that help you investigate, like magnifying glass, like fingerprint crit, take up a hand slot, so you're limited in what you can do.
The Seekers have received a couple cards since Norman's initial release that can give them a slot for a tome. So I believe it's Arcane Enlightenment. Haven't been a huge fan of that card a lot of the time, but Norman might want to look at that simply just to give himself an extra hand slot so he can have his book on the table, as well as magnifying glasses and fingerprint kit if necessary.
Yeah, and then that leads you into now I'm taxing another one of my arcane slots, so now I can't play Mind's Eye if I wanted to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's tough, but yeah, I do
So
think
you're
that
just
the
gonna
book
have
is
to
worth
take
it.
you're gonna have to take sign magic to take up one of your hand slots to give you another arcane slot to make up for the arcane slot that you spent on a hand slot.
Oh my god. That's hilarious. That's genuinely hilarious. But yeah, I mean, this is a great signature card.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
it's
think
what he
if
needs.
you compare it to, say, Split the Angle that was released with the Ire of the Void book, just for comparison's sake, Split the Angle lets you spend an action to reveal the top card of the encounter deck, which,
Ooh,
frankly,
action? Ouch.
that's not good.
Yeah, it's
at all,
ouch.
really. Like, that's just incredibly painful. It did have a free triggered ability to exhaust Split the Angle, so you could discard the top card of your deck to discard the top card of the encounter deck, which is where the whole combination with Alyssa Graham comes in. And so it did give you a way to sort of dig through your deck a little bit faster. And I did use it for that in some games, and it worked out okay, because it's like I look at the top card of my deck, it's like, it's not the card I need. Okay, I get rid of it. And I get rid of a card on the encounter deck. Who knows? Maybe that card would have been bad or good for me. You know, I tried scrying in Norman, didn't work particularly well. I think I tried both scrying 0 and scrying 3 just to give myself some idea as to whether the card I was discarding was good or bad or not. But if you compare Split the Angle and Livre and the book is just so much better.
Is there a Norman deck concept that you think might work, Mr. Lang, where you run both?
I think so. I don't think
Okay.
it's. I think if you run both, you could probably explore that encounter deck control build a little bit more.
Yeah, because I'm looking at Split the Angle right now, and I can see, especially in like a true solo or two player, if you were able to like filter out all the baddies that you see, like that's pretty good. To be honest, I've never played Norman, but I can see why the action part of Split the Angle is it's
Yeah.
expensive.
I I think if
Yeah.
Norman had access to survivor cards, this Split the Angle would be nuts. Because then you could pitch things into your discard pile and recur them with things like scavenging or
Yeah.
scrounge for supplies, and then
Yeah.
woo man, you are playing a different ball game at that point.
That's true. But what I was thinking is, okay, so Lived Bond lets you put a card you don't want on top of your deck, and then Split the Angle lets you discard it from the top of your deck.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, and that's
what was
another
that?
nice combo too.
Combo, got
Yeah.
that going on. Yeah.
I do remember playing, I think it was Where Doom Awaits. I managed to get Split the Angle and Alyssa Graham going, and man, oh man, I felt invincible the entire game. It's just like I knew everything that was coming. If I didn't want to face it, it disappeared. Occasionally you get, say, you discard an enemy and get something, it was hard to get something worse because of Norman's high willpower. So you just filtered out all the enemies and dealt with the treacheries between that and Ward of Protection and stuff like that. It was really, really good. It's just, trying to get that combo going takes time, and that's the biggest issue with it. And I think, but if you have something like the Harbinger as well to help you, or not the Harbinger, but the Livre de Bond to help you assemble that combo a little bit quickly, or quicker, I think that could be quite potent as well, and a lot of fun to play. That sort of I don't think it's quite as over the top as, say, Gloria Goldberg, where you can literally just get a stranglehold over the encounter deck if you get the right combination of cards. Speaking of Norman's signature weakness, it is the Harbinger. It has the Omen and End Times trait. Revelation, place this card on top of your deck while the Harbinger is revealed, and on top of your deck, cards in your deck cannot be searched, drawn, or manipulated in any way except by the below ability. You have to take 2 actions to discard the Harbinger. This ability may be activated while the Harbinger is on top of your deck, as if it were in your threat area. So a unique weakness in that typically something like this would probably end up in an Investigator's threat area. This one is on top of Norman's deck and basically shuts him down entirely until he takes 2 actions. Not a big deal. Most weaknesses at this point require 2 actions to get rid of, and this is this is similar.
It doesn't deal him any damage. It doesn't deal him any horror. It's not an enemy. Like, he can keep functioning as he was without working on this at all. It's not something that you absolutely have to deal with right that minute. It just kind of stops your flow for a while until you spend the time to deal with it. So I don't think it's too bad.
No, this feels pretty mild, honestly. It just feels like a 2-action tax on one turn of the game if you happen to draw it.
Yeah, that's basically what it is you're going to have to spend, if you want to draw cards again, you're going to have to spend 2 actions. But it's not an enemy, like you say, doesn't deal him damage. So if you're playing in multiplayer and this thing pops, it's like, okay, guys, where are we at in the scenario? If we're right near the end, I might even just play through this.
Exactly.
If I've got enough cards in my hand that I think I can go through, I'm not going to take those 2 actions. If you're playing in solo, that's a bit tougher, but at least you say it doesn't require you to act immediately. So if you're in a sticky situation, say you have to deal with an enemy first, you're not required to get rid of this and take attacks of opportunity. You can deal with the enemy, get away, and then deal with this at your leisure rather than having to struggle.
I do have one rules question when it comes to this card, and I think it's obvious, but just want to clarify, is that it also stops your draw during upkeep, correct?
I believe so, yeah, because what happens is you draw this during upkeep and then it gets put back on top of your deck. So you're constantly drawing this card and constantly having to deal with it.
Well, you're not even drawing at all. I mean, even during upkeep.
Yeah.
Because cannot overrides everything in this game.
Yeah.
And it says cards cannot be searched, drawn, or manipulated. So even the upkeep draw, not happening.
So that can sting a little bit, but it's pretty mild, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
But it is worth noting in case you decide to keep it around for a turn or 2.
Can other players get rid of the Harbinger for you?
I'd assume so, because it's played as though it's in your threat area.
Okay, that would make...
Yeah, it says it can be activated as if it was in your threat area. So
Oh, maybe activated. Okay, so that kind of implies that anyone can do it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that is an option as well if Norman gets stuck and may not be in a good position to deal with this weakness. If you're playing in multiplayer, somebody else can spend the actions to deal with it. That's going to do it for our look at Norman Withers, the astronomer, the seeker investigator in the Edge of the Earth investigator expansion. Do you agree or disagree? Have you played Norman? What do you think about him? Let us know in the comments down below. Any closing thoughts on Norman?
Norman seems like a really fun take on the generic Kluver. He has a lot of unique things going on with him. He's not just scooping up a bunch of clues. He's manipulating his deck. He may be manipulating the encounter deck. He's pretty spicy. He's got a lot of neat things going on. I like it.
Yeah, and I like how there's a lot of level 0 Seeker cards and upgraded Mystic cards that seem to like go together when it comes to deck manipulation. So that's kind of cool. It's nice to see, it's nice to see those two concepts like all in one investigator.
Yeah, and Norman covers one of Mystic's biggest problems, which is not being able to find their assets fast enough.
Oh right, yeah.
Because he's got the card draw to facilitate that, and he's got a little bit of resource generation in there too, which is nice. So.
And the intellect means he doesn't have to have Rite of Seeking before he can get started getting clues.
Yeah,
he can come out of the gate.
Yeah, that's a very good point. In that, with many a Mystic, it's like, okay, I can't fight and I can't investigate, so I need to draw my Shriveling and Sixth Sense or Rite of Seeking, etc., etc. And the order those come out in can be quite important. With Norman, it's just like, okay, I've got the investigation part handled. I just need some enemy management, and I'm, pretty good to go. So whereas some Mystics can be a little bit on the slow side, where it's like you're waiting to get those assets that you need, at least Norman can plug away and get some clues and filter his deck and start searching for the cards that he needs to get set up. I've played a few campaigns with Norman, and I've always had a good time with him. I really like I think Seekers tend to just fall into a lot of them just tend to be like, I'm just going to brute force all the clues as quickly as possible and beat the scenario before it can affect me. And Norman can't really do that as well, but he has a lot of other tools that help him build a variety of decks. And every time I look at Norman, I'm like, okay, well, here's an interesting deck, okay, a little bit more on the Kluver side. Oh, here's, the encounter deck manipulation version. Oh, here's a Mind's Eye version. Here's, you just keep seeing interesting builds that you can work into them. The latest flavor of, I guess, the past 6 months has been the Astro Normanical Atlas deck that is over on Arkham DB that uses a combination of Astronomical Atlas, Foresight, and Written in the Stars from Edge of the Earth to really manipulate the deck and go from there. You're using Research Librarian to find the Atlas as quickly as possible, and then and going from there. And that's a entirely new Norman build that I haven't had a chance to play. So there are lots of options out there for him, and I think if you sit down and try to build a Norman deck and just look at even just the first 5 Mystic cards that you're going to include, you get a sort of an insight into how many different ways you can build a Norman deck. That's going to do it for this episode. If you enjoyed what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. If you need to contact me, I can be reached at manfromlang@gmail.com. I'm also on Twitter at manfromlang. Until the stars are right, keep your shotgun close and your elder sign closer. Take care out there, and happy investigating.